Hello and welcome to the Education Magazine. This is episode 5, part 1. And why is it part 1, Charmaine? Because part 2 is going to be a finale where we're going to talk about and we're going to give everyone an insight in what we did when we went on the road.
Oh, amazing.
And as always, I should introduce you, of course, to Charmaine, who works at SinclairsLaw with me. Charmaine, lovely to see you here today.
Lovely to see you too. And we've also got Charlotte Hadfield with us.
Well, how could I possibly forget Charlotte?
Hi everybody, it's really lovely to be back on the Education Magazine.
Yeah, and thank you, Charlotte, for joining us again today. And this episode is going to be quite different because when Charlotte and I, and myself on my own sometimes, went on the road, we had so many questions, Charmaine, that we couldn't answer them all. Yeah. So what we said is, why don't they record the question and we will answer it today? Yeah. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be listening to the questions and then we're going to be answering them. So let's go to question number 1, what we found when we went on the road. This question was presented to me, I think, in Bournemouth.
I have a question, Michael. I would like to know, is it okay for a local authority to have a local policy regarding social care and social care assessments and the Autism Plus policy? Thank you.
I guess, Charmaine, that question derives from a report that I think a disability charity produced back in 2020, which said that 41 local authorities back then were seeking to introduce policies to require more than simply a diagnosis of autism in order for that person to access social care assistance. Yeah. I mean, Charlotte, the idea that a person who is said to be autistic, or a person who, to use other expressions that people might sometimes use, a person who has a diagnosis of autism, for the council to say that that is not enough in itself because of a policy, is that not, in my opinion it is, an attempt to rewrite the law because the law provides the gateway to services and doesn't define disability in the way that the council are seeking to argue this in the Autism Plus policies?
Yeah, we see this a lot, I think. So in my experience, as well as, we're describing a specific situation here where what's required is autism plus something else. I certainly see a lot of situations where your client has a disabled child and the local authority will say, well, our disability, you only get access to our disability services if you have, I don't know, a significant mobility impairment, or if you have there are all sorts of little kind of additional steps put in that don't make much sense when you understand what the statutory definition of disability is.
Yeah, and the Children Act, using, as it does, quite outdated and some people might say offensive language. I can understand why. But it's any mental health difficulty, isn't it? It's any mental disorder. And we have to recognise that autism is still, in the ICD-10 classification of diseases, regarded as a condition that falls under the umbrella of mental, behavioural and neurodevelopmental disorders. That's the terminology that is used in the ICD-10. It might in ICD-11, which is not going to be mandated until 2026. It's not really shifting anything fundamentally away from that, is it?
No, and we have to remember that at the moment there is a real tension between, on the one hand, an emerging movement which celebrates the things that are wonderful about neurodiversity, and on the other hand, we have a statutory regime where your access to help, whether we're talking about social care or whether we're talking about educational provision, the fact is at the moment qualifying for that help really depends on being able to show that you are suffering, that you have what the statute calls an impairment. As you know, Mike, that's one of the criteria for disability, that you have an impairment, which is a difficult and loaded word, but that's what the statute says. And also that you are having difficulties in your difficulties with accessing education, difficulties with accessing your community. And if you don't show those things, unfortunately, then it's very difficult to get any provision for them, because if you're not having difficulties, why do you need help for it? And it is very difficult, I think, for people who rightly want to be positive about neurodiversity and neurodivergence. It is a very difficult tension, that, I think.
And I think councils need to be very careful, don't they, about introducing policy that tries to rewrite or recategorise need. I mean, the children in need definition in the Children Act 1989 is a broad definition. A child who's not, for example, going to school might be a child in need. I mean, not even have a disability. So the idea that the authority should try and inhibit an assessment, Charmaine, simply because you haven't got something more than, autism, that's offensive, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, even recently I've undertook a case where the child actually have anxiety and he's been out of education for more than 18 months. The local authority just choose not to bridge the gap and trying to meet where he is at and trying to provide some outreach support and educate him at the family home, and instead just expect the child to attend the school as if he hasn't got any anxiety. So that is quite devastating to hear that the local authority isn't willing to reach out to help the child.
Yeah. Well, but thanks. I mean, let's go to question number 2, because we've got a lot of questions to go through. So I think question number 2, we're going to combine with question number 11. So let's hear that.
Hi, my name's Abby. I just want to ask, we have an EHCP plan. It has specialist agreed. The LA are dragging their heels. My child is currently in a mainstream unfit provision. But they're dragging their heels over post-16 provision because of funds. What can we do? We've had to fight them for over 18 months now to try and get as far as we have, and we've just got at home a mentally unwell child that doesn't know their next step.
Okay, so the one question I think I have is, how can a local authority continue to name a provision even though that it's been deemed that the provision was not the right provision, i.e. a independent residential school that's costing £70,000. The name was left in her EHCP for 1 year, which meant that the school got that funding and did nothing. They didn't educate my child at all.
So there were 2 people who asked the questions there, Charmaine. The first person who asked the question there was a question presented in Bournemouth, and the second person was a question that was presented to me in Hemel Hempstead. And I think we can answer the first question relatively simply, because the point that's being made is that the EHCP is currently, or at least everyone's agreed that the EHCP is inappropriately naming a school because it's not appropriate school, and the council are dragging their heels in relation to where they should go next. And we're now, and that question was presented to me, I think it was in April, and this recording is being produced in late May. So if the situation is still the same, that is a clear breach, isn't it, of the regulations?
Yeah, that's correct. That's the Regulation 18 of the SEND, 2014.
Yeah, because the regulation, Charlotte, requires the local authority at post-16 provision to make a decision by the 31st of March.
Yeah.
And what's happened is that the council are dragging their heels. It seems to me that the first person who asked that question there, that question in Bournemouth, it's a case that I think would be looking at judicial review there, wouldn't it? Because the local authority are not really reacting to the evidence that's saying this school is not appropriate. Otherwise, we actually have got a plan that describes a placement that everyone agrees cannot meet needs. I mean, it's a similar answer one would give to the second question, really, isn't it? The second person's question, because in that particular question, it said that that the local authority are continuing to name a specialist school that everyone accept is not appropriate. And yet they're continuing to spend the money on a school that everyone accept is not appropriate. Charlotte, we see that quite a lot, don't we?
We do, sadly, Mike, we do. I suspect you see it more than I do.
Yeah, and the extraordinary delay whereby authority sits on the case and they don't do anything. I mean, the answer really, isn't it, Charmaine? If it really is the case that there is no suitable school that is available within a reasonable distance from the family home, a parent has a practical option. Either they could apply for a residential provision because if it's too far away and may not want that, of course, or they might ask for education otherwise than at school. That's what we often see, Charlotte, too, isn't it? that's when EOTAS can kick in. So would you have any further advice, do you think, for any of those parents in light of what you've just heard? I mean, in regard to judicial review, for example?
Well, judicial review is currently the only means by which you can enforce statutory deadlines. The first tier tribunal can't force a local authority to issue an EHC plan. They can certainly order an EHC plan to be reissued at the end of a tribunal hearing, but what they can't do is step in and make the local authority they can say issue the plan in the next 5 weeks or whatever the statutory deadline is, depending on the kind of hearing. But what they can't do, if the plan isn't enforced, is make a mandatory order requiring the local authority to issue the plan. So judicial review is the only way of enforcing those deadlines.
Hi, I'm Karen. I am mum to a 22-year-old with very severe autism, with PANS, which is brain inflammation, and epilepsy. He has been homeschooled effectively all his life by me because, and with no funding, no provision. He's now, say, 22, and I'm told that the 19 to 25 group, anything I might find for him is about putting him to work. He has not had an education at all. I want him to be able to learn. He can learn not by lack of ability, but by lack of provision. Where do we stand? They're saying that there's nothing for him anymore. It's too late.
It's a question about a young adult, 18, who was refused any assessment until she was 18, didn't get any support beforehand, and we're wondering what sort of support she can still get after 18, given that they're not offering what she's supposed to get on her EHCP, and we don't know where to get support and information, basically.
Charmaine, we see this quite a lot, don't we? I mean, Karen, it pained me really to hear what Karen is describing. A severe a case of autism, homeschooled, not received any support from the local authority, and the council is saying there's nothing that we can do.
Because it's too late. But
because it's too
is
late.
It too late though?
Well, is it too late? Absolutely not, is the answer to that. Absolutely not. Charlotte, it's like in the second question, isn't it surprising? I find it surprising that the members of the public are given to believe that when you get to 18, there's nothing else available. I mean, is this the kind of information that's being shared by local authorities through all these publication requirements that they have to try and promote, the idea that people with special needs should be supported? People are believing that when you get to 18, you have no further opportunities for support. I mean, that is so obviously wrong.
No, I think that's a real shame. There's a lot of provision out there I say there's a lot of provision. One of the problems, I think, with the expansion of the regime for specifying special educational needs and provision that we saw with the Children and Families Act is that when you expand a statutory regime from going up to 16 to going up to 25, there is potentially going to be an issue if you don't also increase the amount of specialist provision for school leavers over 18. But having said that, as you and I know, Mike, there are lots of different kinds of provision that could be specified for young people who are over 18. There are specialist colleges that will provide specialist qualifications that are suitable for these young people's special educational needs. There are also mainstream further education colleges that will in some cases be able to make provision that's suitable. It is always possible to specify different kinds of therapeutic provision like speech and language therapy and occupational therapy. And if there is scope for these for these forms of provision to help these young people to achieve their potential between the age of, say, 18 and 25, then on the face of it, there is no reason why that should not be put in an EHC plan. Absolutely right.
I mean, I'd be saying to Karen, don't listen to this advice. Go out and ask the local authority to provide either a bespoke educational provision which they should fund and support and refer to within the education healthcare plan, or find a college that you're happy with, a specialist college. And as Charlotte said, there's lots of specialist colleges out there. that can cater for a young person with this level of need. And don't always forget that social services should be helping too. So there should be a combined effort from education, health and social care to try and find the best package of support for someone. And being 22 is simply not too late. So go out there and ask the local authority to start rewriting the plan. I'm assuming, Karen, that you've got one. And as for the lady who's being refused an assessment up to the age of 18, I mean, Charmaine, our advice is going to be the same thing, isn't it? You know, there are colleges out there.
Yeah.
And the local authority should continue the plan up until the age of 25. And even beyond the age of 25, although you don't get a plan, you can ask social services to make sure that they provide a package of services that include things that are in that person's best interest and in their welfare. Because education is a component, is a factor to take into account when deciding what's in the best interest of a person in need. So I hope I've answered those questions. So we'll go on to the next question.
On behalf of my nephew, his needs have not been met at an independent specialist school, and they have confirmed that they can no longer meet his needs, so he's not attending the school setting at the moment. The local authority still would like to reach out and consult other settings, even though previously most have not been able to say that they can meet his needs. Even 2 previous schools, mainstream and his current setting, have confirmed this. Can we look at education other than at school? We would like to know who will build and write the plan. As a local authority, advising my sister that she is currently needing to build the plan. If the local authority are reaching out to other schools and consult a school that say they can meet his needs, but we feel that they cannot, what are her options? Thank you.
I mean, I find it surprising how a local authority or the parent is being given to believe that it's for them to write the plan. Really, this kind of rewriting the statute is extraordinary. Let me be clear. Charlotte, I'm sure you'll agree with me. The local authority must write the plan. It's for the local authority to decide what should go in the plan, but listen to your views. And if the view is that there is no provision out there that can meet needs, and the schools can't meet needs, and you can't find an alternative school that can meet needs, and if that's what you genuinely believe is the case, then absolutely ask for a bespoke educational or otherwise than at school package. Charlotte, wouldn't you agree?
I think that's right. I mean, the statute rightly provides that parents of children with special educational needs and young people with special educational needs should be supported to participate in the process of finalising an EHC plan as fully as possible. And that is really important, but that doesn't mean that any local authority can sit back and say to parents, you write the plan and we'll decide what we want to put in and what we don't. The local authority has a specific obligation to investigate and assess the needs of the child or young person themselves. That's the whole point of the EHC needs assessment process. And part of that should involve taking advice from an educational psychologist as to what the educational needs of the child are. So no parent should ever feel that they're in a situation where the local authority is simply saying, you say what you want and we may or may not put that in a plan. If that is what's happening here, I mean, obviously, Mike, there's a limit to how much we know about the individual situations. But if that is what's happening here, then I think the parent would be entitled to say to the local authority, well, you've carried out the assessment. What do you think needs to be in here?
Absolutely right. I mean, they should, if they do a competent assessment, you'd expect them to know the answers, wouldn't you? Basically, as a broad sort of piece of advice, you would expect the AO test package to mirror as closely as one possibly can get to the provision that you would get in a school, wouldn't you? You'd want a full-time package, for example. You might want specialist teaching injected in there. You might want social skill opportunities and training, life skill training. It depends on the severity of the need, of course. And it may be that you may have literacy and numeracy difficulties and so on, in which case you might need extra tuition than you would ordinarily get. In school even sometimes. You might need much more even concerted effort to be put into place to try and support that person enhance their skills in those particular areas of deficit. So I hope that's answered that question. So we move on to the next question.
Hi, my name is Nikki. I run a parent advocacy service in pool, but we actually cover the whole of the UK. We specialise in cases where there's lots of different elements going on. So, for example, there might be a disability, special educational needs, there might be domestic abuse, and there might be mental health, there might be a medical issue, and there might be social services referrals. And it can be a very frightening process for parents, as you've said today, and what you said today was exactly what we face, because it just seems to be child protection is the only thing that is thought about when it comes to social services. So I was kind of intrigued. You sort of answered it today, but I think there's a bit more discussion to be had. What can social services actually do? I think our whole ethos in this country, in terms of what we can do for children, is overshadowed by the safeguarding remit. And I don't think I've got a single case out of about 200 cases across the UK where social work is actually doing anything or able to do anything. And parents are so frightened because they've been bullied or harassed or lied to that they want them as quickly out of their lives. They don't want anything to do with it. So what can actually be offered to these children? Because the last thing they want is social care involved. I think that was my first question. It kind of covers most of it. I think 99% of our cases are batting social care off because parents are so frightened, and maybe 1% trying to get them involved and they don't do anything. But I think that's pretty standard for us. I think what I was going to ask was how parents get an SEN lawyer, because I've not encountered, I know a few groups that have sort of specialist advice, but I'm not really sure how to access them, especially when everyone seems so busy. We've got people that we really need to refer to and we don't know how to do it because we can't access anything. We don't have the funding. We'd love to get some funding to get lawyers in place, but we don't. And I think a lot of parents are in that position. We do provide Mackenzie Friend services and proofread paperwork, and I think there's a service there where we can streamline the cases that really need legal support, and I wonder if we can talk about that, because I think our service could really benefit. We have some really good reviews and we get really good work done for parents. We've just turned around a court case this morning which could have been really difficult for a parent that missed out on legal aid and had no funds to get into a case. So that's just an example. Also, if you know anyone that can help an adult social care case, we really need to hear from somebody that can do that. Thank you very much.
Well, that is a really important question. Where do parents get advice? I mean, and how difficult is it to get advice? I mean, legal aid is so restricted these days, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the first way that we normally approach the potential client, if we are at capacity, is just to tell them to go onto the Find a Legal Advisor website. Just, filter it through and say it is the education matter that they're seeking advice on, and they should be able to find their local solicitors who might be able to assist them. But otherwise, at the moment, I think it is quite, we're quite thin on education practitioners who will be able to
that's
assist,
the problem though, isn't it? Local solicitors may not be licensed to offer legal aid.
Yeah, that's
it has to
correct
be
as well.
certain providers who can do it, and there's not many, is there?
Yeah.
I mean, there's charities out there. Charlotte, what do you think you would say to people who can't access legal advice? I mean, there are groups and charities out there that can help.
So there are a number of different advocacy services and information sites for parents of children with special educational needs. EHCP is one of the most well-known ones. Special Needs Jungle is another website with a lot of information on it. If you want a slightly more legal take on what the applicable law is in the first tier tribunal and in the Educational Tribunal for Wales, you can always look at the Noddy Guide, which is released by a set of barristers' chambers called Matrix. And that is a very useful resource for people who want to know the detail of the case law that the tribunal works with. And then there are various advocacy services, which again are readily findable online. And these are all people who will be able to signpost parents to good sources of support and to help them put their appeal together.
Thanks, Charlotte. I mean, that's right. I mean, there are services out there, and of course, one of the services you could use is come along to one of my seminars. I mean,
I'm so sorry. I thought that was obvious.
No, I know, but it's a very serious point. I mean, I one of the reasons why I'm doing these seminars, of course, around the country is to try and give people some ammunition to try and, you know, empower them to know what to do. I mean, it is difficult because there's so very few of us really that are able and are available to help. And I know that there's a long list of people who contact us pretty much every day, and it's heartbreaking. I find it totally heartbreaking. Did you?
Yeah, definitely. Like reading all the stories about what people are experiencing. And, you know, we are at capacity a lot of the time and we can't assist, but we are, you know, we really want to, you know, reach out to assist them. And
we as a firm are trying our best to try and expand, and we're recruiting and we're going as far. We can't seem to meet the demand. We just can't. And we're doing our absolute level best to try and expand the team. Hopefully that will continue over the next coming months, and we will be able to reach out more to more of you who need help. But in the meantime, please, you know, follow me on Facebook and follow the seminars and come along to the seminars. I mean, they're there for a purpose. So let's go on to the next question.
Our daughter had a severe crisis in 2020 when she had severe mental health issues, and it turned out she was autistic. When it was time to return to school, she basically found it very difficult, and she's now been without education for 2 whole years, and no alternative education has been provided. I had to go to mediation because they refused to assess, and then they assessed, and then they said her needs can be met in mainstream. So my question now is, she's now 17, she's still not in school, they're still saying her needs can be met in mainstream. What can I do? I've got the tribunal in September, and they're arguing her needs can be met in mainstream, but she's not in school. So how do I fight to get her an EHCP? Oh yes, one thing, we don't even have the EHCP, we've never been issued one. How do I get an EHCP for my daughter? Oh, and she's highly academic, and she has been diagnosed autistic. So how can I argue at tribunal in September, and it's just me, how can I get the local authority to concede and issue a plan? So that's my question. And I do have plenty of evidence of her mental health issues. And a further issue is that she refuses to speak to a professional. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is a very common question, Charlotte, isn't it? A parent who is saying, well, you know, my child can't go to mainstream. The local authority says no, or you can, and how do you resolve that problem? And there's a tribunal coming up. So, I mean, one of the key things that one would expect a tribunal to take into account is whether the provision that the child requires is beyond the resources of a typically resourced mainstream school, for example. But Charlotte, as to preparing for the tribunal, you know, you and I will be able to give you some tips in relation to that. So Charlotte, what's your main tips?
It's all going to be about the quality of the evidence, bearing in mind that the tribunal is an experienced tribunal and has a specialism in education. Ideally, and this is where really sort of resources and funding comes into play, in an ideal situation where you are somebody who does not have to worry about how much money you spend on evidence, you would certainly get an educational psychology report of your own. So you would go private in relation to that. You might choose, depending on what the educational psychologist said to you, you might choose to instruct another mental health professional, someone like a clinical psychologist or a therapist with expertise in treating children, or a psychiatrist if the child's needs are such that they would require psychiatric intervention. You might also choose to get reports from them. And again, ideally, those experts would be available to go to tribunal and tell the tribunal exactly why they've reached the conclusions that they have in their reports, and why the child requires requires provision that they're not going to get as a matter of routine in a mainstream school without an EHC plan. Assuming that most people are not able to fund that, I think I would be, I don't know about you, Mike, but I would be thinking about any medical professionals who have been involved in my child's care. So, for example, is there a paediatrician involved in terms of signing the child off as not fit to attend school? Is there a GP involved? Is there anybody who's worked with the child to offer them any level of therapy? These are the places that I would be looking. But I think you're entitled also to say to the tribunal, look, the starting point is my child can't even get into school. And, I would really put the onus on the local authority. And if the local authority called the school as a witness, to some extent, the school to say, well, look, if my child is able, it needs are capable of being met without an EHC plan, why isn't my child able to get into school? If that was the case, wouldn't my child be in school now?
Yeah, I mean, the point that she's making, I think, is how does she secure an EHCP? Because they haven't decided to give her an EHCP.
No, I understand that, but these are the arguments that I would be putting forward at that hearing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it seems to me that I would be asking an educational psychologist then. Given that you hear that my child has got acute mental health difficulties and can't go to school, for example, or is too apprehensive to go to school, how do you propose you get him there? Yeah. And I'd be asking social services also to do an assessment, because they too should, as part of the assessment, try and look at getting medical evidence.
Yeah, it's important to know what's the triggers that cause him or her not being able to attend school, and what could be making it easier for him or her to attend school, whether it's to do home education as a starting point and then slowly transit it through to attend school eventually.
Yeah. Well, I hope that's answered that question, so let's go on to the next one.
We have an EHCP review which has been under review since December. It still hasn't happened. The last two reviews were engaging with an old college that my son went to. He has Tourette's and autism. He's 17, and it's been ableist, and we don't know how to go around it with the managers of the college. We've had meetings. My son sat there punching himself in the face in the middle of the meetings when the teacher said, he was the recruiter of the teachers. We went to above the teachers in Bucks College, and he was doing art and maths, and the maths he's had to redo to do ecology at university because the adjudicator didn't turn up at school. So firstly, the school didn't turn up, having adjudicated for Ezra's exam. They just forgot about him because he was one of those children out of school at COVID. And then we've also got the EHCP review. There's 4 of us on the front row just then, and all of us are up for a review 5 months ago. We're still waiting. They don't have the staff. And when we are with CAMS, the secretary's letters are not coming out for 2 months last year, and that was because the secretary wasn't in work and they didn't employ a temp. It's all staff issues in our area in Hertfordshire, and when I lived in Hampshire in Buckinghamshire, we had a very different service. But I think over here, where we're stuck in between being Tring and on the border of Buckinghamshire and Hertfordshire, we're missing out on lots of things. We're not getting the service we need, and the paper of the EHCP is not worth the paper it's printed on. And I don't know how to legally move forward, because my son's now going to go to college at another place in Watford and try and finish doing science and maths there. But he's having to redo maths because they made a failing, and he's having to move to another college because a Nazi Ukrainian said there should be less transgender and more Nazi in the world. And then my son was followed by this Nazi for many weeks through lunchtimes, and we told the staff, we told the head of SEN who'd only just started there 2 weeks, that we were really worried and scared, and she said, you can only call them these, there's nothing we can do, I'll give you a week off. They gave us a week off. We gave them loads of examples of people that they could use as testament for looking at the videos. We even had ableism from the teacher that taught art. He was very rude to my son several times. My son said, fuck off, Owen, in a corridor with his Tourette's, facing the wall. He's the most timid person, and he barely quite did it at him. But he was facing the wall. He said, fuck off, Owen, and Owen glared at him, made him feel really comfortable when Owen knew he had Tourette's. He's his art teacher, he should have known it. And then in maths, Ezra had a group of people all saying about transgender and what are you, a tree? And the maths teacher didn't intervene or anything. And yet, we've asked for reasonable adjustment at the college. They said, I'm sorry, we can't meet needs. So Ezra had to leave because of somebody else's actions, and it wasn't Ezra's, it was somebody else who's got beliefs of Ukraine and don't believe that transgenders exist. It was homophobia. And then when we had the meeting and Ezra was punching himself in the face with Tourette's, I said to David, could you please stop? saying that Ezra's autism is making him misinterpret people's actions against him and making Ezra feel like a disabled idiot. And because of the ableism, we left college. And so we're left high and dry, and we're going to start again, another college, and fingers crossed, but we really need a lot more help.
Well, I mean, if I understood that question correctly, there's been no EHCP reviews, and that's a flagrant breach of Section 44 of the Children and Families Act. They must review a plan every 12 months, and once they review the plan, they should comply with the regulations about the time limits that govern the time period in which they should, respond to that review. So if they are not holding a review, clear as day, judicial review point, and if they have held a review but have not responded to the review and it's gone beyond the time limits under the regulations, which is normally 8 weeks, you expect a new plan to have been issued, then I would be looking at judicial review. So, next question.
My question is, when you have an annual review and you are given a pro forma afterwards, like a record of review, and the chronology or the evidence that is contained within that summary of information is not correct. For example, for my own child's annual review, we had some independent specialists come to the annual review who gave their evidence and support with my child's needs. And a lot of that information wasn't evidenced in the record of review form after the annual review. And I just wondered what you would do in that situation, because even though we have written a letter of complaint to the local authority concerned, they don't want to update or amend the data. So we just really have a record of the local authorities' review, if you like, but none of the parents' views, the child's views, or the independent specialist views have been contained within that record of review. So just what would be the process to get that addressed? Thanks.
I mean, I suppose, at the top of my head stuff, again, I'm not an expert in information law, but I think there's provision, isn't there, under the GDPR, that if a record is inaccurate, there's an obligation to ensure the record is corrected. I think so. I think I may be right, Charmaine. I'm not holding myself out here as an expert in GDPR. I'm not, but I think I read somewhere that they have to make sure that a record that's inaccurate is made accurate if you make that specific request. So let's go to the next question.
Okay, so my question is regarding Tribunal. At the hearing where the panel introduces themselves, is it okay to ask them what their specialist area is? Because they'll introduce themselves and say, I'm a specialist member, but they don't actually say what their specialism is. Thank you.
Well, should you ask the panel for their expertise? That's a good point. How many judges, Charlotte, will sit in the court and make decisions in relation to cases that they really don't know much about? A commercial judge sitting in education, or an education judge sitting in a taxation hearing, or something. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, people are prepared. They should be able to ask the question, shouldn't they?
Yeah, they should.
Don't you think? I mean, I got to say, Charlotte, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I can't see it. So, firstly, I'm not sure I can see any reason why people shouldn't ask. The answer and the sort of receptiveness to it probably depends on the panel that you've got and how receptive they're feeling to that question on the day. I will say you can normally, once you know your panel members, you probably won't know your panel members until the morning of the hearing. But once you know your panel members, there is nothing to stop you from Googling them to find out what they do. That information either will be on there or it won't be. No reason why you shouldn't do that. The judges will always be lawyers. Well, I say obviously, but for those for people who don't understand how the tribunal is constituted, the tribunal judge will always be a lawyer, and they either will have specialised in education when they were practicing in the way that Mike and I do before they became lawyers, or they may not have that experience of sitting in the education tribunal. The panel members will have a variety of different specialisms. They could be, so I've seen panel members who have been ex-heads of special schools, ex-Senkos of special schools. Some of them are language therapists, some of them are occupational therapists, some are occupational psychologists, some of them are specialist teachers. There will always be local authority officers in there. If you're doing an extended appeal, which involves appealing the contents of the social care parts of the plan, then one of the panel members will be somebody with expertise in social care, most likely a current or ex-social worker. So there is a lot of expertise in the panel. I personally wouldn't like to say that the fact that a panel member is a speech and language therapist doesn't mean that they are able to take a view on the other aspects of the plan. And I would be quite careful about suggesting that if I were before a panel. I don't know about you, Mike.
Well, I think you have to be very careful because, of course, these people are going to decide your case, and you could, by asking the question, offend someone. I mean, people are people, human beings, you know. But I think it's a valid point, you know, because they are a specialist panel, and they purport to be a specialist panel, and they can use their expertise. But what is their expertise actually in? Yeah. So you can understand why the question's been put. I mean, I certainly understand it, but I don't think, Charlotte, that it's going to be likely that you could succeed on an appeal against the tribunal decision because you purport to claim that the educational psychologist who sat in the panel didn't have any expertise in mental health, say. I can't see that, but it's a reasonable question to ask if you ask it diplomatically. Well, thank you all for those questions, and a lot of them, we've got through so many of them. And just quickly, I suppose, we've got one on Facebook, I think I'll answer quickly. Daughter has dyslexia, doesn't have an EHCP, wants to get a reader, presumably in relation to exams, forthcoming exams. What can she do? The answer to that pretty much is, by way of reasonable adjustments, you should be entitled to ask for additional support if a reader is needed. The Equality Act will be in play there. I think practically what happens is the school will normally have to demonstrate to the exam board that they've used this scheme before, or this reasonable adjustment before. So the earlier you ask for that, the better, I think, the better for you. So that's so request it sooner rather than later is the point I'm trying to make, but I hope that's helped. Well, great. Well, thank you all for joining us again, and I've thoroughly enjoyed answering your questions, as has Charlotte and Charmaine. Thank you all for joining. Charmaine, thank you. It's been a pleasure seeing you. And Charlotte, thanks ever so much for your contributions again today, which is I'm so grateful for, and I'm sure that a lot of people will appreciate. So I hope that you will join Charlotte and myself on a future SEN event, one of my lectures at one of the events. I know at the moment we've got Isle of Wight coming up. We have on the 5th of July. We have Exeter coming up, I think on the 6th of September.
Yeah, that's correct.
Exeter. And we have, of course, Manchester on the horizon too. So we've got a few more coming up. Please come along and join me. And if you've got any questions, just so you know, you can continue to ask your questions, present them to me on Facebook. Well, maybe I'll pick up some for the next editions of an Education magazine. And please keep on telling me your stories, because, of course, we might use your story in another episode of the Education magazine. This is part 1 of the episode 5 of season 3 of the magazine show, because part 2 is going to be a bit of a bit more upbeat. I think we're going to be talking about, you know, and Charlotte and I will be talking about when we went on the road to go to Hemel Hempstead and Bournemouth. So you'll be able to give you a little insight into how that all went. But thank you all so very much, and thanks again, Charlotte, for your contribution today, and thanks, Charmaine. I hope to join you. I hope you will join me, I should say, soon in a future episode of the Education Magazine podcast. But thank you all for joining.